this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On orders, coalition forces have been striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases to help with intelligence and logistics to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense. To all the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you. That trust is well placed. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military. In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality. Saddam Hussein has placed Iraqi troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for his own military, a final atrocity against his people. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on the harsh terrain of a nation as large as California could be longer and more difficult than some predict. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens, for their great civilization, and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people. I know that the families of our military are praying that all those who serve will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with you for the safety of your loved ones and for the protection of the innocent. For your sacrifice, you have the gratitude and respect of the American people. And you can know that our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines, so that we do not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors on the streets of our cities. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. And I assure you, this will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory. My fellow citizens, the dangers to our country and the world will be overcome. We will pass through this time of peril and carry on the work of peace. We will defend our freedom. We will bring freedom to others, and we will prevail. May God bless our country and all who defend her.
Jesus Christ. I think I'm getting PTSD just from watching that. That's when I mean, this is definitely the formative political experience of my life. It was like the couple of years after 9/11 and leading up to the invasion of Iraq. I actually finished college, undergrad, a semester late because I was like so busy organizing anti-war protests in 2002 and 2003 that I failed like a gen ed requirement that anybody should be able to pass in their sleep. So yeah, just seeing that smirking asshole do that announcement again was fairly brutal. But in any case, I am joined, of course, by our producer Forrest, and very excited to have him back by Branko Marcetic, who is a staff writer for Jacobin and the author of Yesterday's Man, the case against Joe Biden, which came out last year from Verso Books. Thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me.
So that is the book.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a very different reaction to you. I watching it. I was just thinking, what a relief it is to see a normal presidential speech. Just crazy stuff. Just very calm, measured. That's right. Yeah, really takes you back with nostalgia.
Back when the good Republicans who were civil and
yeah, that's right.
I actually have I have to grab it out of the doc, but there's the Chris Kaliza article that came out like the same day as the fucking 18th anniversary of the war in Iraq, which he basically says that Bush is unrecognizable in today's Republican Party. And we kind of talked about that last episode, I think, quickly when we plugged this.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, Branko, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, he's right to an extent in the sense of, Bush was very good at using tone, and like all the old Republicans were, masking basically the same stuff that Trump and the modern Republican Party does now under a much more measured, calm, kind of tone, that the compassionate conservatism that Bush ran on, which is why, I remember when Trump was elected in the first 2 years, that was the kind of beginning of the Bush rehabilitation, was when Trump was doing the Muslim ban and all this other kind of stuff. People found that speech that Bush did shortly after September 11, where he stood with a bunch of Muslim leaders and he said, this is not a war against Islam, it's not a war against Muslims, it's a war against terrorism. And people said, wow, isn't it Bush was terrible, but at least he did this one thing, completely missing the reality, which is that, yeah, he did this one speech, but that was to mask the fact that at the time he was rounding up thousands of immigrants, many of them Muslims, and detaining them, sometimes for weeks and months, deporting them, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's there's a lot going on in that Bush era, and the way it's been remembered, I think, in today's media climate.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's. I mean, yeah, one of the most disturbing things about the last, 4 years of resistance liberalism was the rampant, rehabilitation of Bush. One of the real Republican heroes of resistance liberalism under Trump was David Frum, who was the speechwriter who wrote the Axis of Evil speech, about Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. And it's certainly undeniable that it's that the sort of face that Bush and Cheney put out was superficially more polite, that they weren't saying things that were as openly racist, but of course they were also rampantly as you say, spying on and detaining, Muslim immigrants and native-born Muslims for that matter. At least the spying on part, although also in some cases the detaining part, and doing things like knocking people over the head and sticking them on helicopters to fly them to Egypt, so they could be detained without, they could be interrogated without the niceties of American law.
And we'll get to that. We'll get to that with the Alberto Gonzalez and Biden back and forth in 2006. Kind of go into that during that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Just etc. Right. I mean, and I really think a point worth underlining is that, we talked about this a little bit on the episode on Monday, but I don't think you get Trump without George W. Bush in at least two ways, right? One of them is that Trump was, even though Trump's foreign policy, if anything, was actually more hawkish than Obama's in some ways, in his rhetoric in 2016, he was playing on, certain kinds of isolationist anti-war sentiment, so it was like a reaction against Bush. He got even Republican debate audiences loved it when he went after Jeb Bush over the Iraq War.
I have that clip. We might want to watch that quickly before we get into the whole Iraq War thing.
Yeah, let's do it. But they have the other way that Bush was laying the basis for Trump is that Bush's decision to respond to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, not by treating it as a criminal matter, which is what should have happened, and not even by doing the sort of Clinton-esque thing and firing off a few cruise missiles, but by elevating it to the status of this clash of civilizations, global military operation, it was the global war on terror, that was sort of treated as this framework that we could have little wars within, like the Cold War. Without that, it's not clear that somebody would have been as successful as Trump was in 2016 in playing off fear-mongering about Muslims.
Well, even during the 9/11 speech, the way that when he says Islam is a religion of peace, and he kind of gestures towards, oh, I know it's not all Muslims. That's not him putting out his hand to the Muslim population in this country. That's a weapon for him in that case, because he's saying this is obviously an abomination of Islam. I understand that it's not all Muslims, but if Muslims in other countries want to help these movements out, want to help these jihadi groups out, we are going to fucking kill you. So even his when they're like, oh, his rhetoric was nicer, his tone was nicer, he kind of put his hand out to Muslims that weren't extremists. Like, the reason that he did that was that it's a weapon, it's a threat. You know what I mean?
And in those speeches, what he was doing was dividing the world, between him and Osama bin Laden. That this is it's like that, passage from Deuteronomy or whatever. This is the day of choosing. That if you're not with us, you're against us. And again, that laying the basis for the idea that that America was under this global civilizational threat, from really this extremely tiny terrorist groups that were not actually capable of doing that much, is certainly helped prime the Republican base for that kind of fear mongering, about the threat posed by Muslims in 2016.
I think Biden's entered the chat.
Well, it made it acceptable to support too, because he made it clear this is not a racist war. Hey, you can back this war and you can still feel good about yourself. And there's shades of it. I mean, that's the old kind of Reagan thing, which is that always add in a patina of optimism and sunniness to whatever horror you're about to inflict in whatever particular group you're targeting. And we can see shades of that in what's happening now with the Biden administration in China, which is, on the one hand, in response to the shooting last week, they have done kind of a lot of very, very symbolic, performative kind of empathy outreach, right? Doing speeches and saying, anti-Asian terror and hatred is not good. It's terrible. At the same time, really ratcheting up tensions with China, fear-mongering about that country, escalating this kind of this other clash of civilizations happening now, which of course feeds into the very kind of climate of hatred towards Asian people back home. So it's, we're seeing a similar dynamic now, except now it's not aimed at the Middle East, where the US establishment has picked another region of the world that it will go after this time.
And they've written about it. I mean, the think tanks that kind of work with the military industrial complex, like they've put out things that say, a much better existential threat, like the Middle East is dwindling as an existential threat, and like that we can really push onto the people through propaganda. China is the thing, and the Asian bloc, I guess, in general, is kind of the thing that is going to be a much more lasting conflict and like a second Cold War, because they have the resources pretty much endlessly. You know what I mean? Like they're kind of the only, like China's the only other superpower that's ever existed. So our existential threat of China kind of, at least the way the foreign policy gurus in both parties, I guess, want to frame that. It kind of is like something that can go on forever, and they see that, and they see their jobs lasting forever. They see military equipment sales lasting forever. They see all kinds of like their consultancy positions lasting forever through that.
Yeah. Oh, so do you have that clip? You're gonna play? Yeah. Let's do it.
On Monday, George W. Bush will campaign in South Carolina for his brother. As you said tonight, and you've often said, the Iraq War and your opposition to it was a sign of your good judgment. In 2008, in an interview with Wolf Blitzer talking about President George W. Bush's conduct of the war, you said you were surprised that Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi didn't try to impeach him. You said, quote, which personally I think would have been a wonderful thing. Close quote. When you were asked what you meant by that, you said, for the war. For the war. He lied. He got us into the war with lies. Do you still believe President Bush should have been impeached?
First of all, I have to say, as a businessman, I get along with everybody. I have business all over the world. I know so many of the people in the audience. And by the way, I'm a self-funder. I have my wife and I have my son. That's all I have. I don't have this. So let me just tell you, I get along with everybody, which is my obligation to my company, to myself, etc. Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right? Now, you can take it any way you want, and it took Jeb Bush, if you remember at the beginning of his announcement, when he announced for president, took him 5 days. He went back. It was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Took him 5 days before his people told him what to say, and he ultimately said it was a mistake. The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake. So George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East.
But so you still think he should be impeached?
I think it's my turn, isn't it?
You do whatever you want. You call it whatever you want. I want to tell you, they lied.
Okay.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right. Governor Bush, when a member on the stage's brother gets attacked,
I got about 5 or
respond.
6. Do I get to do it 5 or 6 times, or just once
nice.
responding to that? So here's the deal. I'm sick and tired of Barack Obama blaming my brother for all of the problems that he's had. And frankly, I could care less about the insults that Donald Trump gives to me. It's blood sport for him. He enjoys it, and I'm glad he's happy about it. But I am sick and tired of him going after my family. My dad is the greatest man alive in my mind. While Donald Trump was building a reality TV show, my brother was building a security apparatus to keep us safe, and I'm proud of what he did. And he's had the gall to go after
the World
my
Trade
mother.
Center came
He's
down
had the
during
gall
your
to go
brother's
after
reign.
my
Remember
mother.
that.
Hold on.
Let me finish. He's had the gall to go after my mother.
That's not keeping
Look, I
us
won
safe.
the lottery when I was born 63 years ago, and looked up and I saw my mom. My mom is the strongest woman I know.
She should
This
be
is
running.
not about my family or his family.
Okay.
This is about the South Carolina families that need someone to be a commander-in-chief that can lead. And I'm that person.
Governor Kasich, would you weigh in on?
Oh my God, that is like one of the just I mean gotta like deeply evil lunatic, but I mean my God, like Donald Trump had some chops as an insult comic, and like that is one of his greatest hits. That's up there with the Marco Rubio bottle of water thing. That's like,
Another classic.
my mother is the greatest person. Oh, maybe she should be running.
Well,
do you remember when
that was
yeah.
That was a great period because it was before when we all assumed he was going to drop out or not do that well. So it was just kind of enjoyable, not knowing that he was actually going to end up winning the Republican nomination, let alone the presidency. And it was just great to watch all these awful people on stage just being absolutely humiliated and attacked by him. I mean, that was what was great about that period, and it all turned sour, obviously. But the other response I had watching that was just that there was Sanders. I can't remember exactly what moment it was that showed that he was catching fire. But I think that they had that first debate, him and Hillary and the others, Martin O'Malley and stuff, where he did quite well. He started going up in the polls at some point, and he really started to become more than just this kind of long shot, cranky candidate. That was one sign at the time for me that I was thinking, wow, okay, something's happening, something's really changing. But in this specific moment right there was the other one, because I never thought in a Republican debate I would see anyone get up and trash George Bush and say, everything that Trump said there. It was a remarkable moment. I think at the time, I don't know exactly what my reaction was because it wasn't clear how it would be taken. Obviously, you got a lot of boos, but that it was a very stacked audience that was kind of primed to not go for him. But I mean, we saw footage of people clapping, and he did get a few cheers. And
kind of behaving like a wrestling audience.
And when Jeb was trying to hit back, sure, people were clapping and cheering, but like they panned out to the audience, you could see a lot of people just sitting there, like this, while Jeb was talking. I mean, he was trying the Republican debate audience. It just wasn't quite the same as like even in 2012 when Ron Paul was running for president. I remember Republican debate audiences who were willing to cheer him when he said something they liked, like let people die if they don't have health insurance. But Republican debate audience in 2012, I remember booed Ron Paul when he said that we should apply the golden rule in foreign policy and not do unto others what we didn't want done unto us. And it's like they booed that, right? So like I think the fact that even that stacked audience of like Republican activists and donors had like kind of a mixed reaction to that exchange shows like just how far the country had drifted by 2016 on the Iraq War issue.
I mean, it's a seriously unpopular war by any standard. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that there's kind of like the Chomskyan point, which is that when we oppose war, it's over tactics a lot of times, like the general public and politicians both. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times it's not like an anti-war for the sake of being anti-war, but still like the movement behind Iraq not being like there was nothing like that with Afghanistan. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, we're still obviously in Afghanistan, we're still kind of in Iraq too, but.
Yeah, there's still a couple thousand American soldiers in Iraq, and they even recently, have like a little bit of a renewed push, not so much with the U.S. but with NATO, in Iraq, for counterterrorism. So I mean that's still, we're closer to being genuinely out than than we have been, but we're certainly not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, sorry, Branko.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, one last thing to add. I think it does just show what a far-reaching impact the war had on. I mean, it's terrible to refer to that war sort of in the context of just how it affected politics in the United States and other countries in the world, because obviously hundreds of thousands of people died, a country was destroyed. So much chaos for that region of the world. But if we're looking at if we are analyzing it from the perspective of American politics, it is fascinating just how far the reverberations of that decision to launch that war have gone, and how they, I mean, it's a thing that we still are living with, even though, as you say, troops are back in Iraq. It doesn't seem like there's ever going to be a time where a president is going to pull them out. It is in some way, even in abstract ways, still informing the discourse around foreign policy, around war, in the U.S., which is it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I should say, by the way, it's worth parenthetically noting that the premise of the question that that Trump had opposed the war in Iraq at the time is a complete lie. If you go back and actually watch the clips of Trump, talking like in like late 2002, early 2003, when people would ask him, on TV, "Oh, should the U.S. invade Iraq?" I mean, he wasn't enthusiastically in favor, but like he certainly wasn't enthusiastically opposed. He was sort of like oddly indifferent. He was like, I don't know, maybe if they're going to do it, they should do it and stop talking about
There's
it.
the Howard Stern clip where he says it, and Howard Stern is like, "So do you approve of the war and like the way it's being handled?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think it's," and it's like muted Trump. You know what I mean? Like, because that was Howard Stern Trump. Like, it wasn't like bombastically over accentuated Trump, but he was like, "Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, I think it's going all right." And then I think within
there's that version of like, there's that old Trump that was like, it was like the 80s, 90s Trump that you still got there, where his response to anything like that, you could ask him just anything, and it's like, "Hey, Trump, what do you think about like, Hitler invading Poland?" He's like, "Well, I think it could be very good. I'm not sure, like, like it just, he just didn't really." Like, he sort of acted like he was just trying not to alienate anybody, which is a like really weird Trump to like see in retrospect.
Well, he saw a future political career for himself in that point.
Yeah, he did the same with Libya, right? He initially there was record of him vaguely being supportive of it, and then obviously when he ran in 2015, 2016, he changed on it, which I think the question of is Trump right or wrong? What was his real thinking? Should we think differently about him? All that's pretty irrelevant to me. What's interesting there is that he obviously read something in the national climate that led him to go, okay, now it would be great for me to just completely flip on this. The other thing I was just thinking, I don't know if you have this clip, but it's quite stunning to watch actually that clip of the Republican debate in, I think that was end of 2015, and then think back to 2000 and was it 2002 or 2003 that Michael Moore was booed at the Oscars for speaking. It was 2003 for speaking out against the that push for Iraq. He was booed at the collection of probably the most kind of liberal, elite liberal event or festival.
Yeah, I can try to find that. I don't know if we'll get copyright flagged for that.
That is a fascinating I think back to back the transition from liberal Hollywood booing Michael Moore for saying shame on you, George Bush, for going to Iraq, to Trump saying we should never have gone to Iraq, it was a big fat mistake, to at the very least no response, no booing. He got booed when he attacked Bush personally and said the World Trade Center came down under his watch. But correct me if I'm wrong, in that clip when he actually said the war was a mistake, no one was going against that.
Yeah, which is, I mean, really that speech that Michael Moore made about Iraq at the Oscars. I mean, it wasn't even like a really fire breathing thing. I mean, I think the line that as they were playing the Oscars wrap it up music, to get him to stop, like I think the line that he was trying to say was when the Pope and the Dixie Chicks are both against you, you've gone wrong. Yeah. No, that is remarkable how much the Oscars crowd, like how much angrier they were about opposition to the Iraq War than a Republican debate crowd was by 2016. That kind of tells you everything. But I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, I remember like in I think it was fall of 2002. It was like was supposed to be, my next to last semester of college. And I remember like my political science professor, who was like a pretty liberal Democrat, was just sort of like while introducing classroom discussion about the, drive toward Iraq, was just sort of taking it as a given that, of course, Iraqi, WMDs actually existed. And at the time, I was sort of pushing back. I was like, well, how do you know that, right? Where's the evidence? And he just like in this like very world-weary way said, well, of course, I mean, they're not going to share all the evidence they have of this, this doubtless, intelligence, whatever,
You just gotta believe. You just gotta believe the experts,
Yeah, exactly. So that was, and that was like, again, like that was a liberal Democrat teaching in a place where like lots of people hated Bush and and all of that stuff, and that was the sort of prevailing attitude at the time. I mean, not that there of course weren't many millions of people who opposed it, and the largest largest anti-war protests in history in 2002 and 2003, but on any kind of establishment level, going from sort of academics who saw themselves as like savvy and realistic to the Oscars, Hollywood, to certainly the Democratic Party. The prevailing attitude was, yes, of course, there's this great threat posed by Saddam Hussein, and the only real discussion to be had is yeah, that's right, yeah. And and earlier than that too, by the way, I can remember being in high school and at the end of the 1990s and having largely the same argument with a civics teacher, because that was when Bill Clinton was bombing Iraq again, and pushing for war back then on the same grounds, which of course everybody's forgotten.